Hey everyone, coming back at you with another tutorial in this video series. This time we're going to be kind of picking up where we left off before. We have a couple goals with this video. The first one is to remove that ugly inline CSS that we had by pulling that CSS code out into its own file. The next thing we want to do is host Bootstrap CSS and JavaScript files locally, meaning we don't have to go out to the Bootstrap URL every time and download those packages every time a web page is requested. And then the third thing is just to, in general, learn about how static files work in Django. And when I say static files, I mean your CSS files and your JavaScript files, and actually images too, but we're not going to talk about images today, just the CSS and JavaScript. But that'll give us a good starting off point for future videos where we do actually work with images. So let's start. As always, make sure you're in your virtual environment and you're at the root of your ship log directory project. And let's first get rid of that CSS, that inline CSS in our event capture templates index.html file. So if it bothers you as much as it does for me, that's a good thing, because having inline CSS is not a good practice to follow. So you always want to make sure that your CSS is in an external file, just for clarity and so that your code is readable and you have no issues there. So got rid of that. Don't worry, we're gonna rewrite that in a new file. But I guess just before we do that, let's run our server just to make sure you understand the difference between with and without CSS. So Python manage py run server, and we go to localhost :8000. So we're back to our push together buttons that don't have any space between them. So that's what we want to refix by adding this external CSS. So let's make a directory in the root of our project called static, and that's where our static files are going to live. And inside of there, make another directory called CSS. And inside of CSS, which is where all of our CSS files are going to live, let's make a file called style.css. And here's where we're going to recode those lines that we just deleted from our index file. So it's going to be similar, but a little bit different. So we'll write this out quick, and then I'll explain what is going on here. Okay, so if you're not familiar with CSS, I'm going to just try to help you out real quick here. Anytime we see a button-group-vertical class, and anytime there is a button element within that block of HTML, we're going to apply the following two attributes to it. The first one is giving a margin on the bottom of 10 pixels, and the second one is a border radius of 10 pixels. And the important, again, overrides any other CSS that might be trying to change the behavior of this element. So, and just to reiterate, border radius is what's going to give the square edges of the button a rounded shape. So go ahead and save that file. Now we want to go back to the root of our project and tell Django that we just added this static folder with CSS files inside of it. So to do that, let's open up our shiplog settings file. And let's just go through here. These are all default values that were generated at the beginning of the project. The one thing you want to make sure, I'm sure you didn't touch anything yet, but just to make sure for static files to work, you have to have that Django contrib static files installed app listed here. And then all the way down at the bottom, you want to make sure you have your static URL here. So the static URL is just the location that these static files are going to be served from in the URL. So if your URL is example.com, all of your static files are going to be located at example.com/static. What we want to do is add a couple other values in this settings file. The first one is going to be our project root, which is going to be basically the absolute path to the ship log folder on our operating system. So to do that, we can do something like this: os.path.abs path for absolute path, and inside of there we're going to pass in os.path.dir name, and inside of dir name we're going to give it name. All right, so a couple things here. Let's just save that. So up here we do see that we're importing OS, so we can access functionality there. Now back down here, ospath.appspath is going to return a absolute path from the root of your file system up until whatever argument you give it. And the argument we're giving it is os.path.dirname, which takes one other argument called __name___. Now __name___ is a property that's associated with this file. So it's basically this file's name, the path to this file. And when you call dir name on a file, you're going to get the directory that the file lives in. So after you apply these two functions, what we're going to end up with is a path basically on my machine right now to /users/TonyFlorida/shiplog. And that is going to be the value of project path. Now with that, we can add another value in this settings file called static files_dirs. And that's going to be a list. And the only value on our list is going to be the path to the static folder that we created just a minute ago. So that's going to be an os.path.join project path and then static. So again, if you're not familiar with the OS package in Python, the os.path.join is going to take the absolute path, which is defined as project path at this point, and basically just add a /static to it. So it's going to concatenate those two values together and properly format it into a string that is a file system path. And I just should point out here that static files dirs is a keyword or a value that Django looks for. So this is how we're basically letting Django know that we created this static directory at the root of our project. So go ahead and save this. And now that Django knows where to look for these static files, and we have checked in our settings that everything is set up the way it should for static files to work, let's go ahead and open our event capture templates index file. And in here, go up to the top, and the first thing we want to do to enable static files functionality in this file is to load that template. So up here at the top, we're going to do curly %load static, and then curly or %curly. So what this does is it loads the template tag for static, and now we can access other functionality within here. So what we want to do next is add another entry up here right below our two Bootstrap imports. We're going to do a link rel equals style sheet href, and we're just kind of following the pattern about what Bootstrap does, and then close. So the value here is going to be curlies, and inside the curlies we are going to say %, just like up above, and then inside the % we're going to do static. So we enabled the static up here, static template tag, so we can call into it here. And then the value we're going to pass to that is going to be css/style.css. So again, this is going to be loading the style.css file within the CSS directory, within the static directory, into our HTML file here, and we're going to be able to apply those attributes to the button group vertical buttons. So instead of having this inline CSS, we're going to be loading it externally from this file. So go ahead and save this. We'll run our server, and hopefully we will see the rounded buttons with a space in between them when we reload. So we do. So that works. Now let's take this one step further, and like I alluded to in the last video, we want to be able to have our Bootstrap files, these guys, the one located at this URL and the one located at this URL, we want to serve them locally. And by that I mean right now when a user visits the index of our website, we actually go out to the internet and download this file. And the same thing for the JavaScript file. But this is not going to work for the guys out on the ship when they don't have internet access or they don't have reliable internet access. So what we want to do is we want to have these Bootstrap files hosted locally. So that's a really easy thing to do. Just copy one of the URLs for now and get out of here. We want to go back into our static CSS directory and simply, like we learned in a previous video, use the wget command to download this file locally. So go ahead and do that, and you'll see now that we have Bootstrap min CSS installed, or downloaded, I'm sorry, not installed. We have Bootstrap min CSS downloaded locally into our static CSS directory. Let's do that same exact thing for the JavaScript file. So go ahead and copy that URL, get out of there, and then go into your static directory. And now we want to make a JavaScript directory. So go ahead and make a JavaScript directory, go into there, and do a wget for that JavaScript file. Great. So that is now downloaded locally as well. Let's go back to our index file and update these URLs. So now instead of grabbing this, let's see. Yeah, so instead of grabbing this from the internet, we're going to grab it locally using the same type of pattern that we did below for our style.css. So the value here is going to be curlies with percents static css/bootstrap.min.css. Let's do the same thing for the JavaScript file. Curlies, percents, static, and the value is going to be javascript/bootstrap.javascript. So right away, this looks a lot cleaner than it did before, and it's going to be more reliable for our end users. The one thing I do want to do here is just lump together the style sheets, the CSS files, and the JavaScript files. So not important. You don't have to do that. Okay, let's save this file and make sure that we didn't break anything. So let's start back up our server, and we'll just go ahead and type that in: python manage.py run server. Okay. We'll go back here, we'll do a refresh of the page, and honestly, as long as everything looks the same, it probably didn't break anything, but just to confirm, let's look at the page source. So in here, you'll see now that our style sheet, style.css, is being loaded locally. So that's that file right here. Also, the bootstrap.css file is being loaded locally, and that's what that looks like. And finally, the Bootstrap JavaScript file is being loaded locally. So actually the Bootstrap JavaScript file is not being locally, and that's because I misnamed it. So let's go back in here and fix that. We forgot to do bootstrap.min, min.javascript. So if we go ahead and rerun our server, refresh the page, get out of all these old guys, and then look at the page source again, we should be able to click on bootstrap-min.javascript and see that it's actually properly loading. So at this point, everything looks good. We have just learned about how to work with static files in Django. We learned how to host static files locally as opposed to going out to the internet and downloading them every time a page is requested. And we pulled out some inline CSS into an external CSS file and loaded that back into our HTML file without any changes. So the end product here looks exactly the same as it did in the previous video, but the underlying code is much cleaner and will be easier to work with in the future. Thanks guys for sticking around. I look forward to helping you out in the next video.